So partnerships for informal science education in the community, PISEC, that's where we work. The whole idea is we have CU university educators. So these are like grad students, undergrads, some postdocs. A lot of volunteers come out to work with us. And we partner with community centers, and MESA is our big partner. It's the Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement Program. And they selectively recruit girls, ethnic minorities, reduced lunch program kids, kids who are underrepresented in sciences. And so we have a nice, awesome, big partnership with kids. So we all go out to these sites and we work with these kids, and I'll go over what they're doing in the picture in a second. But we use the physics and everyday thinking curriculum, but we've kind of modified it. So we've made it kind of into this cool story. So imagine you're a kid, and you get this letter from a wizard, and it tells you that he wants you, or he or she, wants you to go explore this cave system out in France or wherever. And there's weird things happening in the cave. So then you get to teleport into the cave. So everybody, 1, 2, 3, teleport! Okay, we're in the cave. Now, you can see all these stalactites and stalagmites, and you feel on the ground, and there's a battery, light bulb, and wire. Oh no, what must you do with this? You get to light your way through the cave and explore all of these different pet curriculum. We have different storylines, but that's the one we're using this semester with circuits.
For those who don't know, Rhosefry just described a tertiary artifact, or a third space, which is a constructed self-consistent world.
What ages are the kids?
We have elementary school and middle school generally.
So first grade through...
Not first grade,
okay.
So I think it's more like 5th through 8th, I guess.
8th, okay.
Yeah, and this semester we only have 2 middle schools. So what are middle schools? Like 6th through 8th? Yeah. I'd say they're mostly 6th, 7th graders this semester. Yeah. Alright, so we use the stop action motion animation, which is really fun. And the kids, this is what they're doing in here. They have a little camera and they're taking some pictures of something. But usually we have them make little cartoons of what they've learned. So they get to make this little animation movie about the stuff that they've done. And we also use the FET Sims. So yay, those are awesome. You guys know about those. And our funding is from the GILA NSF Physics Frontier Center. And we also get other grants, like we got a CU Diversity, a CU Excellence, and a CU Outreach grant. So, any questions about PISEC? Wait time. Okay. Alright, so the CAS background. So the CAS was originally taken from the CLAS. It's taken from the CLAS. You guys probably know a little bit about the CLAS. There's these orthogonal questions. They kind of just took, or orthogonal categories, they just kind of took a few that we were interested in, a few questions from each, and then tried to modify it for middle school, elementary school students. And there was no formal validation done on it at all. So it was just kind of modified, given to students. So then my work is trying to do a formal validation process on this. So we gave it a new version number. So the CAS 1-point stuff is the old before I touched it, and 2-point stuff is the new after I touched it. So here's what I did. I went through 223 of the old CAS 1-point things to look through misinterpreted questions. So kids were putting A, but they really didn't mean A at all. And so then I tried to reword questions. And then I did more evaluation of written responses, but I haven't counted the number of post-me yet. And then I did a total of, yeah?
How do you know they didn't mean A?
So we have, we'll get into this in a second, but we have a survey and it's multiple choice, and then they have a short answer.
Okay, great.
So yeah, you look at the short answer and they're putting some wild.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah. So then I did as of yesterday, a total of, I personally did, 104 interviews on students to try to inform each person.
With students,
With,
right? With
students.
students.
Thank you. All right, so this is, yeah.
What is the IRB process like for that?
So I'm not videotaping them at all. I'm just kind of talking to them about science and then typing transcript notes. No one can.
Right, we do have IRB accidentally since expired. We've got to go back to this as we consider this. But the answer is it's a pain, but not an insurmountable pain.
Yeah.
Which is you get parental consent. We also do it through MESA, which is a great sponsoring organization, so they deal with all of that on their end. But we have to have sort of rigorous protocols that we run through our end. So in the end, you need kid signature and parent signature on both.
Thank you.
I was amazed how not bad it was.
Nice. Okay. All right. So the first question on here was, how do I feel about doing science activities? And this was pretty much on a Likert scale, sort of. So you can go from really like them, kind of like them, feel in between, kind of don't like them, really don't like them. And basically, to score this, they're given a point if they have either of the two favorable responses, and nothing if they have feel in between, kind of don't like them, really don't like them. And so here's what I saw on this problem, or this question, is that kids kind of saw the word activities and immediately thought of PISEC, because everything we do in PISEC says activity 1.1. And so we got a lot of responses that were like, yes, you get to light the bulb, which is part of our curriculum, or yes, something describing our curriculum, or no, I don't like doing the worksheets. So what we kind of wanted was something more science in general, and you'll see how it gets changed a little bit later. Yeah.
Why do you score everything that's not positive as just 0?
So, let's see. When I went through and looked at the short answers, when we saw really like them and kind of like them, they basically, let's see if I can actually explain this. You couldn't tell a difference between the really like them and the kind of like them on their short answers. So just wanted to give a point for yes and
A great question, which is why not a negative one for negative answers?
yeah.
Right.
So
Can you distinguish between neutral and negative is another way of asking that.
I don't think so. One problem that we have, and we'll get to this in a little bit later, is most of our answers are positive. So we don't have a lot of data on the neutral or negative to really go into too much, but also we can't really assume that those are continuous. We haven't really seen.
So are you sort of saying that you don't have any validation that there's a meaningful difference?
Better speak up now.
Sorry, are you saying that in your explanation, like these long answers, you don't have any data that will tell you a difference between neutral and negative?
So yeah, we just don't have a lot of students who said neutral or negative to really do that on, and that is kind of a problem of this that I was hoping to address and see if you guys have any ideas for that.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
Yeah?
So Rhosefry, maybe you're about to get to this, but you're talking about how the word science activities triggered them to respond specifically about the activities that you were involved with, and you wanted them to be more general. But I'm wondering, so if they are more general, what other science activities are these students engaged in? I mean, what would you be referring to, or what would you like them to be thinking about besides your science activity? Do they have a lot of experience with science?
Well, from interviews that I did yesterday, most of them came in and they were really pumped about dissecting different animals. So they definitely had some experience with science in their school, and basically we have a pre-test for our program if we're getting their pre-test that is talking about their other life experiences, and then their post-test that's just talking about our program activities, I don't know if that's really measuring a difference.
And just to let folks know, this is the CAS 1.2. We're already up to the 2 point something.
Yeah.
So why don't we keep railing here?
Yeah, sorry. All right, so next we have, do I think there's science in everyday life? Scored on the same scale. And what we saw is a lot of students said, yeah, there's science in everyday life because I have to go to school, or I have to go learn science in school.
So smart.
Exactly, but that's not exactly what we're asking. We're asking if there's science in our world around us. So next, we've got, this one has a couple of problems. Would I like to do an experiment or be told about it? First, along this here, we have do the experiment and be told about it, and a lot of students were confused with, we have definitely maybe, and then maybe indefinitely down here, and so they circled two answers, so that was a little wonky. And also, everyone, of course, would rather do an experiment, because those are fun. It's not really fun to have somebody lecturing at you, so most people, almost everyone said yes to this one, and it was because they're just so much more fun. And then, how would I feel about doing science as my job? And this one was an interesting one, because, first of all, we got some that they were really positive about doing science activities. They were really positive about liking experiments and doing science activities. But then they got down here and they said, because I hate it, which was a little strange. And then,
Sorry.
Huh?
Are you going to show us the distribution of answers, or
Not with this.
was
no.
that a representative answer? Or?
That was not that representative, but a few. This one was very, most people said this. Or not soccer player, but no, they would not want a job in science. Definitely not, because they want to be something else, like a soccer player or an actress or somebody. I even got one kid said a famous person. And also we got a no, I don't want a job in science at all. A couple people said because I want to be a doctor.
That's not to do with science.
Exactly, which was kind of weird, and we think what might be going on is that these kids, when I was 10, I wanted to play first base for the Colorado Rockies. And I may have liked science and thought it was fun, but I definitely didn't want to be a scientist because I wanted to play baseball for the Colorado Rockies. So they kind of have this, I can do anything, which is great, but we want to measure more of how their personal interest in science as opposed to what they want to be when they grow up, which is an interesting measure, their study, but isn't what we are looking for.
Is it that they don't have a concept of what scientists would do as a job?
That it might be. I mean, there's been studies on the draw a picture of a scientist, and they get like this boring guy with glasses and a lab coat. So that might be. But in interviews, basically the main reason was, no, I just won't consider it because I know I'm going to be a professional soccer player. Definitely. So, all right. So here's some characteristics we see on the CAS. So they're all positive statements, and we're wondering about whether we should change this up. And they were originally all positive statements just because it's less confusing. We have elementary, middle school students, just an easy format. Already went over this. I scored on the Likert scale. And we also found, so we were at one point before I came giving a survey that was like 6 questions long with short answers attached to all of them. And basically once they flipped the page, everyone started doodling. Not everyone started. There was a lot of doodling. Kids who had given really detailed answers in the first part were giving like one-word answers. Like their attention span was just not there anymore. And also, kids prefer a certain layout. In my initial 21 interviews over when I first started doing this, I asked them if they would rather have questions. Okay, we saw on the previous slide questions like this, so they're stacked one on top of the other, and then the short answer come horizontally. And we gave them the choice between that and questions where we have a question and then basically vertical Likert scale, and then we have short answer over here. And every single one of the kids in the 21 interviewed said that they preferred the second version. I think it's just because even though there were the same number of questions, it looked shorter. You could see more white on the page, so it looked like it was less work. All right, so here we have a little bit of data. This is CASP 1.2, and this was given out of elementary school. This was only on 11 students. And so here we have percent of students who answered favorable to these questions. And these are the CASP statements, which I will put up again. So 1 is, how do I feel about doing science activities? 2 is, do I think there's science in everyday life? 3 is, would I like to do an experiment or be told about it? And 4, how would I feel about doing science as my job? And basically we saw, and this is standard error on the error bars, but in a t-test we saw no significant shift over 1 semester.
Sorry, I'm a little puzzled. The top of the scale is 100%?
Yes.
So 100% of the students gave a favorable response to
Yeah.
how would I
so
feel
that's
about doing
only-
science as my job?
No, sorry. That one is, how do I feel about science activities?
No.
Sorry, at the
So-
bottom you
Yeah,
have
you're
CASP statements
right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
And then underneath you have CASP statements 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm
Yes.
reading number 4. How would I feel about doing science as my job?
Yes, so that one
You're
got
saying
favorable, but then that one is very low. So we definitely see some...
Sorry, now I'm lost.
So they're two different sites. But
Yes,
number 4,
right.
what Mike's pointing out
Uh-huh.
is students are answering
Yes.
at the elementary school very
Yes.
favorably for this thing. For the
That
job.
is not very representative, and I probably should have put something else up.
No.
I
Well, it's impressive in that site.
Yeah.
And the question is how
Yeah.
those students are interpreting the questions. Also, we moved on beyond this particular framing.
yeah.
So don't want to get caught up too much, but the whole idea was to say the challenges that we've had in interpreting what the students mean by all of this has led us to revise the survey quite a bit.
Yeah.
So those earlier responses to question 4, how would I feel about doing science as my job, where the student said, I want to be a soccer player. Those are all responses were coming in this second group, housing project versus elementary school?
A housing project and other like middle schools, elementary schools. So yeah, I maybe should have looked at this one a little bit more before I put this particular data up, but
So you had hundreds.
I
right?
find
So
that
this is showing 11, and
Yeah.
you had hundreds overall.
not hundreds in that semester and that version. Definitely, yeah, a few hundred overall with that job.
So this is just a small teeny
Yeah,
bit.
that's
Subset.
a,
This is a
that's
very
a,
subset.
that's 11 kids.
So another thing just to mention very quickly is that these kids who are in this program are self-selected.
Yes.
So the MESA program recruits them, but then they specifically choose to come to this after-school science program despite being in elementary or middle school. They have clear parental support from getting picked up after school at a later time. So having high scores is maybe not shocking.
Yeah.
Right?
All right.
Rhosefry?
Uh-huh.
Are there only 4 statements on the survey, or is this a subset of statements?
That is only 4 statements.
I mean,
Yes.
Yes.
This survey.
okay.
Yes,
Entire
we
survey
only-
is 4
sorry,
statements.
yes,
All right.
we only have 4 statements on the survey. So then, just to give you kind of a sampling of other data we got, and this one, the job question was just taken off in this iteration. And so this is a little bit later, and the questions are now, I like science, so taking out the activities. I can touch something to do with science right now, and that one's a little weird, but basically the idea was, can they identify that there's science everywhere around them? And on interviews, I actually got an interesting response to that question, which was some kids would touch their eyeballs and say, there's science in my eyeballs taking light and can see, or they would like touch the table and say something along the lines of, well, there's like atoms in this table, or so definitely saying something with touch. Got a very interesting response, but at the same time, it's either you got it or you don't have it. So we can't really see any much changes over time except for don't have it and then all of a sudden you have it. You have this idea that there's science around you. And then the third one is I can figure things out by myself. And it's kind of a problem-solving confidence question. Can you figure things out by yourself? A lot of the students were definitely seeming to understand the question, but then we also got a lot of, which actually is an adequate answer for this question, but we got a lot of, well, I figured out how to do my video game. So we're going to talk about that. So things to notice in the data, as Katie was saying, I was going to say this, high pre-post scores, and definitely our kids are volunteers. They don't have to come, so most of them come because they want to come, so we have a population of people who are pretty excited about science already. Attitudes don't change over the course of one semester. You know, we don't have enough data of kids who have come for multiple semesters. We think we might be able to see a change after multiple semesters, but we just don't have enough kids. So many of you know the CLAS attitudes and beliefs go down over the course of one semester if the attitudes and beliefs aren't specifically addressed in the class. So we're seeing attitudes staying constant, which is interesting. And then according to literature review, J. Osborne et al., there's no change in attitudes after age 9, but it decreases after age 14. So we have the age range of like 9 to before 14, like probably around 12 or so. So that's kind of what we are seeing.
Quick question.
Uh-huh.
When you say there's no change, do you mean in aggregate for the whole class, or do you actually track individual students?
It's an aggregate for each class, and what we'd like to do is kind of look at, is there differences and similarities in classes? What can we lump together to maybe see more? One of our big problems is we just don't have enough N.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is I don't know if this is happening, but I can imagine some students go down, some students go up, and it washes out.
And it washes out, exactly.
Okay.
But no, it brings up a good point. It's probably worth also tracking individual students and then aggregating.
Yeah.
And I still don't buy this Osborne result. It's out there in literature.
Yeah.
But I think we'll have to sort of investigate that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to bring up a really big wrench in the works, maybe is say that there's no change in attitudes, assuming that this instrument is measuring attitudes in the first place.
That's one of the questions that we have.
Yeah, that's.
I guess the thing I can think of, I'm sorry if you talked about sort of, but I just imagine that there's some kind of impact of like always framing the questions in a positive way.
That's
like,
what we're
like, yeah, I want to agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know?
and what we were thinking is possibly, so I'm actually going to go to, hopefully if all this works out, go to Science Discovery and give those kids the survey as well, see if there's any difference. And Katie had an excellent idea. We could see if we could just give it to a regular classroom that isn't a whole bunch of kids who are selected.
Yeah, I mean,
in the same school,
in the
right?
same school,
Yeah,
the same teacher
schools.
picks like a random class and that is not affiliated. They have not specifically chosen this after school, and to see if there's a difference
See if they
between our
are.
kids who are super positive right out the get-go and like some other people who are not so inclined. And then that would maybe help us see how much of the impact this positive sort of statement thing is having. You would expect that a random
Well, those are two different issues, too. I mean, just to clarify, the question is, Noah brought up, is this instrument measuring what we think it's measuring? Right? Which, now we do have some evidence of it from the interviews and from the short answer responses.
Yeah.
But the point is, if you don't see any change, maybe it's because we're not measuring the thing that we're trying to measure.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's no change. Or the other thing is, we did put negative responses in the past, which is to say, I hate science. And then the favorable response is to disagree. That's a classic CLAS thing. Really hard to do with the kids. I mean, aside from the fact that it's enforcing a double negative, which we know from Our English classes is a negative.
Single negative.
Right. So the question is, how is it that we can probe the students in ways that are sort of meaningful but still get results? And then the other thing that would be an obvious thing to do is to have multiple questions and make sure that the students are answering consistently. The downside is students won't sit for that long.
I would just imagine, giving half the class, where you have a lot of positive statements, and the other one where it's framed the same way, but just the opposite, and just see what's the impact, what's the difference,
Yeah, it's just for students to be able to interpret the negative is more difficult.
I understand, I believe that. I just feel like there's, when it's always positive, and it's just if I'm a positive person, then
Ever on the interviews, when I, really probed at, what do you think about this? Why do you like it? They were super pumped about science. They really liked it. They gave, oh my God, and I dissected this part, and I saw all these, so detailed, and they were obviously excited. They were smiling and loved it. So we also might just have our population that loves it.
So that makes me think that, there may actually be an issue with the method of measurement with this age kids. That even assuming surveys like this work for measuring attitudes at the college level, it could be that giving 9 to 14-year-olds a series of questions to answer positive and negative just doesn't work. But it would be interesting to give students these surveys, see how they answer, and then do the same thing where you just ask them, how do you guys feel about science? And they all get excited, but they all gave neutral answers. Then you can say there's clear evidence that if you ask them how they feel about science in the context where they get to talk about it, that they like it. It's just this kind of sequestered.
So we also looked at the pre-posts, and they were also all, pretty much almost overall all positive.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
So I just also just say quickly, I know that also, as you said, it's hard for the time constraints with kids and so on, but the interesting thing that Kara Gray did, in terms of asking students, what do you think how a scientist would want to respond, or maybe, basically, I guess, it's how do you know that they're not just giving you the answers that they think you want them to give?
Yeah.
Right? And the results from that was that, the students know the difference between what they expect or expected to answer and what they really feel.
Yeah.
That's, sorry.
Kind of curious if it would frame it any differently, as opposed to giving them kind of statements like the strongly agree, moderately agree, if it were numbered 1 through 5. I wonder if that might be more abstract and difficult for the younger kids, but it might change to oh, I really like this, strongly agree, that sounds good. You might just frame it a little differently, I don't know. I'd be curious to see that changed results in any way.
We did, we've wrestled a little bit with this. We started with smiley faces and frowny faces.
Okay.
And might go back to something like that. Language is a major issue for a lot of these students.
Yeah.
About who gives the survey, who administers the survey, and who administers the interview. If you're the person that's doing the activities with the kids, I think there's definitely a bias possibility.
Yeah. So this semester we had the interview or the survey given before we did anything. So before they met us, knew us, came in, passed it out, took it, and then the interviews that I've done so far, I have never been to that site, so they didn't really know me. But yeah, definitely in the past we've done survey after a introduction where Laurel comes up and talks about her cool job in science. So that's problematic. We've also had me being the site leader giving the interviews, so they knew me, and we try to do this as close to pre as logistics allow. But they definitely knew me a little bit doing the interviews. So we definitely have some where they don't know me at all, and some where they definitely know me a little bit. So, all right, we ready? This is the current version that's going out this semester, and I'm going to pass it out so you can follow along, and I'm going to go over question by question.
Why don't you split it in half and turn it on both sides?
That's a good idea. Thank you. go over question by question, or do you want a second to look at that?
So I have a question. So this is really different from the previous two versions.
And we're going to go over each.
Right. So are you going to talk about the specifically why of all things? Like,
Yes.
In 15 minutes.
In 15 minutes. I have 18.
Okay.
All right. So the first question is, I like science. We saw that the activities was kind of like, oh, PISEC activities, so just took out activities. And so the number I'm going to throw up, you're going to be like, what? Where did that come from? This came from one semester that we did this. This is not all of the data we have so far, but this is a semester. And 98%, when you looked at the short answer versus the multiple choice, the short answer backed up their multiple choice for I like science. And then we added a science is, and that's because so last year in a round of interviews, I asked the question, so first I asked the question, do you like science? Very positive. Then I asked the question, what do your peers think about science? Or what do other people in your grade think about science? And I got a mixed result. About half of them said, yeah, I think my peers also really like science, and I think it's a good opportunity for me to learn. And then the other half of them said, well, I like science, but I think everybody else hates it. They think it's boring, and they don't really want to do it, and they think it's hard. So we took out the I in this, basically, to see, we would hope that I like science, and science is interesting to me, kind of are correlated, but basically we took out the I to see what they say. And it's followed by, why do you feel that way? Can you explain your answer? So, short answer prompt, can you explain this? Then we have, I think scientists have exciting jobs, have pretty fun jobs, don't care, have boring jobs, have terrible jobs. And this is...
All of the above.
Pretty much. But this again is, we're taking out the, do you want to be a scientist? And putting in the, well, what do you think of scientists? Because as I said earlier when I went over PISEC, we have a whole bunch of grad students and undergrads who are scientists who are coming out, and they tell them about their research. We even have an activity where the scientists have to explain their research in the terms of little kid speech. And so they are explaining being fun and exciting. So possibly we might see a shift. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah.
A, B, D, and E appear to be on the spectrum together.
Yeah.
C is not like the
That's
others.
bugging me. It's just like all these other things. Like,
A lot of the C's are.
and another thing like A8, I want to understand how things work. I don't really care, and it's not that important to me. Seem to be like almost identical.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I could choose either one, or it's not important at all. I mean, all three of those.
Well,
seem
all
to
three of
be,
those are
like,
scored the same.
Like
so,
the same,
you know.
right?
Yeah.
And I can
Yeah.
figure things out in science in between. Like, you know, it just doesn't.
I would actually
Some of
consider
this makes
ditching
sense.
the neutrals, to be honest, before students.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the fact that it's a different category.
Well, the I don't care is really different.
Yeah, and it could be, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know might work better.
Yeah.
I don't care was basically like kind of a meh idea.
You've run this?
Huh?
You've run this version?
Yes.
Do you get people thinking I don't care?
No.
Okay.
And we only ran it on one site so far, and that is the site where they're all gung-ho about science, and they are all like, oh, they have
So they're all
awesome.
positive, so you don't
Yeah,
know if anyone
so
would
I have
select
no
I don't
idea.
care.
But
Yeah.
this is also a classic thing in these Likert scales. Is often it depends on the audience that you're working with, but often it's hopeful to force people into a positive or negative response, as opposed to giving them the opportunity to hedge or overthink the problem.
I definitely, when I take CLAS, I'm like, well, I know it's supposed to be this side, but I feel neutral. So
Right. Or there are times when it's this and there's times when it's that, so I'm going to weigh it as neutral.
Yeah.
So, right. Plus, simpler.
Yeah.
So are you going to talk about like the categories and the underlying constructs
Yep.
of these 5?
So I already said that, and so these 3 are supposed to be from the personal interest category, and I think it's pretty important to have personal interest category. There's this paper, Sorge et al., Fun is Not Enough, Attitudes of Hispanic Middle School Students, and he says, this is just one guy's opinion, but he says, from what he's seen over the study, that Latino personal interest in science is linked to the desire to continue in science. So that's kind of important for our program. We want them to keep liking science and keep wanting to get into science. So it's important to have a personal interest questions if my instrument is measuring anything at all. And so then we have, can you give an example of what you think scientists do for a job? So it's kind of a little bit like the draw a scientist question. What do you think they do? What do they look like? What do they act like? I got a lot of, on the interview so far, they measure things and they learn about the world, which is really interesting. But of course, we have this population that's super gung-ho about science. So then we have I can figure things out in science, and this came from the I can figure things out by myself, which is the problem-solving confidence. And then the I can figure things out by myself, 87% of students could back up their answers with an example of things that they figured out by themselves, and this is just on that one semester. But again, I said we were getting some, well, I can figure out video games, and I can figure out code to my locker, so we wanted to see about science, yeah?
Well, when I'm looking at this, it seems like the choices kind of run an odd spectrum in the sense like, the bottom is I never versus A, most of the time.
Okay, so when looking at this I can figure things out by myself question, they seemed like, they seemed to answer less confidently than they were. Like, they could give 3 examples, but then they said, sometimes. So it's kind of more of a more comfortable answer for the positive sides. And I mean, there's times when I can't figure things out and I'm completely stuck. Jackson!
Sure, but okay, so like I like this. So most of the time I like this, but how about instead of sometimes I like a lot of the time, and then like I usually cannot. So, it could be like the bottom end of the spectrum, and then there could be something like a little bit above
The
that.
question is, right? B and D could be consistent answers actually currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
They kind of.
Yeah. Right.
And not that students think about it this way.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sure it troubles me much more than it is.
But
so I was just, we were just sort of thinking about this Likert scale issue, and I was wondering if it's worth trying, just making it yes or no. So in this case, it would be, I can usually figure things out in science, yes or no. Science is, science is interesting, yes or no. I like science, yes or no. I don't know if that would make it better or worse.
It's being scored that way. So
It is being scored that way.
Right.
And maybe it's simpler to just answer a question yes or no than to try to nuance it. I'm not sure.
it doesn't allow for shifts or gradations, not that we follow that now. But yeah.
Well, you're not the way you're scoring.
Yeah, we're not already.
So you're looking at, do you go from one game to another?
But then there's always the kids who are like, I'm not going to put, like, they can say sometimes, but they're not going to say a definite yes.
Well, so then this brings into, I think, an interesting question, which is maybe we should be fine grading it more and not coarse grading it more. I would suggest everyone's going to put yes forever. But maybe there is, I think that there might be real significant difference between most of the time and sometimes. And sometimes is a lot more hesitant if you're in 6th grade than at most of the time, which is almost, it's a pretty big deal. And so, one thing to think about is maybe looking at it actually more closely. Is some,
Okay. Well, I think one way you can do that is actually sort of have a scale, have it one end, like always, never.
Have them
And
mark
then
it.
ask them to mark between those two streams where they think they lie. You can actually measure.
Right, that's a big interpretation for students. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Make it a free-ranging scale and say, all right, show where you would land
It would allow
on
them
this.
to do the middle.
Especially if we had 5 marks on it anyway, and they could choose where they wanted to go and continue them there.
Yeah.
The downside is that it's actually, I mean, that requires yet another skill for the kids to have
Yeah.
to be able to interpret linear plots.
So in some ways, we've also talked about the difference between an elementary and a middle school. Middle school students are pretty with it, you know,
Yeah.
like they understand these words to some degree. Maybe not English as a second language students as much, but in generally, I think this is possibly not a problem. But if we go to 4th or 5th grade, then could we adjust? Do we need to make adjustments? Is this really applicable for K through 12, or is it really applicable through 6 through 9 or something like that?
What? Just fast forward me. Alright, so then this is followed by, can you give an example of something you figured out in science? So if they're favorable, they better be able to tell me sometime when they could do it. When they give me some time that they did it. And then I want to understand how things work is a new, basically just new one. It's from the sense-making category. We want to see if they can make sense of, or if they want, or if it's important to them to make sense of the world around you, how things work. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking so much. But
No, it's fine.
like, so this bit about the self-referential part. So A, it's important to me,
Yeah.
but then B, it's sort of important to understand that like could
Yeah.
be taken as more like a general comment about the importance of science
I-
instead of what I think, you know.
Honestly, I think the me was taken out in that one just because I didn't have enough space on the page.
Okay.
So maybe
Put it
put
back
that back in.
Well, so I noticed you went from 4 questions to 3 questions, and now basically to 5 questions. So
Yeah.
and you had said
So-
earlier that there was this issue of attention span. So is this an issue?
I think so what we were saying of the level of 4 questions with short answer was just right. And then when you flipped it over to the back page, the attention span was lost. And so this is 4 questions plus one that doesn't have a short answer. And the short answer is basically probably where they spend most of their time. So that's the best answer for yeah, I think it's okay, but I don't know for sure.
So 6 and 8 are different constructs then, right?
6, yes. So
So you have three items for the first construct, and then you have a single item for the other 2 constructs.
And that's
so there's
because
no way to like say there are consistent responses across these different items for a particular construct.
and that's one of the problems with our attention span of our group.
Right.
How do we do that?
But I mean,
And-
I might consider trading one of the
Uh-huh.
3 items for the first one, so you could have 2 in another
Yeah.
category or something.
And I think we don't want I like science and science is on there for the rest of eternity. I think what we want to is get rid of one of them. We're just putting sciences to see if they have a different view when the eye is taken out. So yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely think the personal interest is definitely one to keep more of, but it would be nice to put a couple in the other categories. So then this, I don't personally really like the wording on it, but I didn't really know that was the best I could come up with at the time. And it's, can you explain why you want to or don't want to understand how things work? And it's a little, kind of a mouthful, I guess.
I feel like, you know, with this explain why you don't want to understand. I mean, I just find it hard. I find it hard to believe that there are many people who would say like I'm just not interested in understanding how things work. I think it's more of an issue of like, do I feel confident or can I? You know, is that something I can do?
We had a question in the previous go round that was I'm not happy until I understand how things work, and we did see kids say stuff like, oh, it's just kind of it's boring. I don't really care. But then we took out the happy because there's a lot of kids who who are like, oh, I'm a pretty happy person, so I could not understand how things work, and I'd still be happy. So, but yeah, I definitely did see examples of kids saying, I understand how, or this is why I don't want to understand.
You don't want to understand. It's definitely different than it's not important. It's very different from don't want to.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I want to, it's not important.
Right. You could just be like, well, I've got other things that are more important to me. You know, so this is lower, but this doesn't mean I don't. You know, so.
Yeah, like it's not worth it. Sure. It's not worth my time or effort.
Yeah. So we.
Well, I've been told I really don't understand all that stuff.
Alright, so here's just kind of a list of things we want to measure. Differences in sight. Somebody before me kind of did some look at it, and I need to go through it and look at it because it was just kind of a rushed thing. And we might be seeing elementary schools can be lumped together, and middle schools can be lumped together, and there's a difference between the two, but again, I need to go back and look at that more closely. We want more numbers of same kids over multiple semesters. More than we were getting 4 that we could track over 3 semesters, so some more. We also want to see, this is a possible future list, are there any gender differences on any of these questions? And so if we ever do get an instrument that we decide that this is stable, this is about as good as it's going to get, we pretty much trust this, maybe measure an intervention, so some change to our program, see if we get any different results. So some questions. I think we already did this a little bit, but do we have any more comments about these questions? The questions on the survey.
Maybe put them all up.
Well, you guys have a copy of them.
No, I mean put
No,
all
put
the
all of your
discussion questions
okay.
up so
Sounds
we can
good.
just kind of finish.
All right. And then do you have ideas about how to provide an intervention that will lead to a positive shift? There's the CLAS says, you have to specifically address attitudes, but you guys have any other ideas? And then do you have any ideas about what questions might be different based on gender? And then we've seen Lauren Koss' paper with gender disparities, and personal interest was one that there was a difference between men and women. But yeah, if you have any input on that one, and anything else that you want to talk to me about.
You ever look at anything about a student's interest in science fiction?
That's interesting. No, we've never done that. But
see if they have similar personal characteristics, the kids are the same. You would assume maybe all of us like science fiction or something.
Or another way to do it would be to say,
spark interest and think these amazing stories, whatever, there's a science behind science fiction, and that in some ways can be inspiring. It's Star Trek or Star Wars or something. I don't know.
That's old stuff, man. They don't know that. We asked, what was your favorite cartoon? Phineas and Ferb? Do you even know what that is?
Yeah,
no, I don't. So.
That's where you define your gender difference.
Really in science fiction.
Sci-fi.
So a quick sort of comment and maybe another suggestion too, which is I think that we heard a lot of great stuff about modifying this, which would be very helpful. And either making the constructs, the response is simpler or more nuanced. Well, I think actually both would be an interesting way to go.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of an intervention having an effect is this is substantially different from the CLAS, not only in pronunciation, but also it tackles things that are less sort of epistemological and expectation oriented, and more about personal identity, self-efficacy, and interest. So I expect that the kinds of programs that we are running are the kinds of things that would impact students by providing them that. The other way I might suggest going about this, and just as a sort of complement for some subset of students to follow in Charlie's idea, so you might have kids list out or state 3 areas that they're interested in sort of the, with 3 hobbies or 3 areas of interest for them generally, and see if there's a shift in the old, if science ever makes that list.
With our population, would guess, our population that I went and interviewed yesterday, I would guess it makes the list.
Be interesting to see.
Yeah, it would be really
So,
interesting.
I mean, certainly soccer's going to make the list. And
certainly soccer.
To allow Danny to have some time, maybe I'd also suggest that folks follow up with you separately then.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.